The coffee was always best on the porch. That was something Harold used to say, and I kept saying it after he was gone because some truths outlive the people who discover them. Every morning for 41 years, we sat in those 2 wicker chairs and watched Carver Street wake up, the Mullen boy walking his retriever, the mail truck groaning around the corner, the elm tree in the front yard throwing long shadows across the porch boards. Harold would wrap both hands around his mug even in July, as if the warmth were something he didn't want to waste. I do the same thing now, force of habit, or maybe just love with nowhere left to go. The house at 14 Carver Street is not impressive by any modern measure. It won't appear in a magazine. The 3rd stair creaks. The kitchen window sticks in humid weather, and you have to lift it at an angle Harold spent 20 years meaning to fix. The wallpaper in the upstairs hallway, pale yellow with small blue birds, has been there since 1987, and I will not apologize for it. The porch wraps around the whole front face of the house like 2 open arms, and in May, when the roses bloom along the south-facing rail, there is no more beautiful place on earth. That is not sentiment. That is fact. I turned 72 in March. My knees remind me of this constantly. My doctor, a kind young woman named Patel, who speaks slowly and makes notes on a tablet, tells me I am healthy for my age, which I have decided to take as a compliment. I sleep well. I cook for myself. Real cooking, not microwave trays. I tend the garden Harold started and I finished, which now has 14 varieties of roses and 1 very stubborn hydrangea that blooms purple some years and blue others and seems entirely uninterested in my opinion about it. I was not lonely. That is important to say. People assume widowhood is synonymous with loneliness, and it is not always. I had my neighbor Ruth, who came for tea on Thursdays. I had my books. I had the house, which breathed around me in a way that felt like company. Harold was gone, 4 years in April, but the house still held the shape of him, the dent in the armchair. The workshop smell of cedar and machine oil that drifted up through the basement door on warm days. I was not lonely. I was contained. There is a difference. They arrived on a Tuesday in October, which I mention only because Tuesdays were my grocery days, and I had just returned from Harmon's with a full bag including the good coffee and a small bunch of dahlias, and I was in the middle of putting things away when I heard Nathan's car in the drive. I knew it by the engine, a small irregularity in the idle he'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. Harold's habit, apparently, passed down through blood. I was glad to see him. That is the part that still hurts to remember. I was genuinely, simply glad. He looked tired. That was the first thing I noticed. Nathan has Harold's jaw and my father's eyes, that particular shade of gray-green that looks different in every light. And that Tuesday, they looked like weather coming in. He hugged me at the door the way he used to when he was small and had fallen off something, tight and slightly desperate. I held on an extra second. Sylvia came in behind him carrying nothing, which was unusual. Sylvia always carried something, a dish, a hostess offering, a prop of normalcy. She kissed my cheek with the very front of her lips and said, "Eleanor, the porch looks good," in the way people compliment things they've already decided to change. I made coffee. Of course I made coffee. I put out the good cups, the ones with the small roses on the handle that had been my mother's, and I set dahlias in the blue pitcher on the table, and we sat in the kitchen the way families are supposed to sit. And for about 4 minutes, everything was ordinary. Then Nathan set down his cup and looked at the table instead of at me and said, "Mom, we need to talk to you about the house." I want to be fair. I want to tell this the way it actually happened and not the way it looks in hindsight when everything is already colored by what came after. So I will say this. Nathan looked ashamed. Whatever came out of his mouth next, in that moment, sitting in my kitchen with the dahlia smell in the air and his father's ghost practically leaning against the counter, Nathan looked like a man who knew he was doing something wrong. Sylvia looked like a woman who had prepared for this meeting. She had notes. Not literal notes. She didn't pull out a folder. But she spoke with that particular fluency that means the words have been rehearsed somewhere private, shaped and smoothed until they sounded reasonable. She said they had been struggling. She said Nathan's business, a small contracting firm he'd had for 12 years, had hit a rough patch. She said the economy. She said market conditions. She said the word restructuring twice, which I have learned is a word people use when they don't want to say the real word. The real word was debt. The real word, as I would later learn, was gambling. But that Tuesday in October, Sylvia said restructuring, and I listened, and I held my cup with both hands the way Harold taught me. The proposal was this: I would sell the house. The proceeds would resolve Nathan's financial situation. With what remained, they would purchase a larger apartment, large enough for all three of us, where we would live together, as a family, which was, Sylvia said, what Harold would have wanted. She said that last part carefully. What Harold would have wanted. Like a card she'd been holding since the funeral. I looked at Nathan. He was still looking at the table. "This is your father's house," I said. It came out quieter than I intended. "Mom," he started. "Harold built the workshop in that basement with his own hands. He planted every rose on that porch. He fixed that window 11 times. I stopped. He never fixed it quite right, but he tried 11 times. Sylvia smiled. It did not reach anything above her mouth. "We understand this is emotional," she said. "But Eleanor, practical realities don't pause for emotions." It was the first time she'd spoken to me like that, not the last. I registered it the way you register a change in air pressure before a storm, not quite conscious, just a shift in the body, a knowing before the knowing. I told them I would think about it. They stayed for dinner. Sylvia complimented my pot roast and took a second helping, and I watched her look around my kitchen the way people look around rooms they are already redecorating in their minds. I washed the dishes after they left, and I stood at the window that sticks in humid weather, and I watched Nathan's car back out of the driveway with that small hesitation in the idle, and I thought, something is already broken. I don't know what yet, but something is. The elm tree threw shadows across the porch boards. The house breathed around me. I made a second cup of coffee, and I took it outside, and I sat in Harold's chair. I thought about what he would have wanted. It was not this. Whatever it was not this. I did not say yes. I want to be clear about that. I never said yes. I said I would think about it, which is what you say when you need someone to leave your kitchen so you can breathe again. And apparently Sylvia heard something in that sentence that I did not put there. Because 3 weeks later, on a Friday morning while I was at Ruth's for tea, Nathan's truck appeared in my driveway with a cargo of boxes, a rolled-up area rug I had never seen before, and Sylvia directing operations from the porch, like a woman who had already decided where everything would go. Ruth saw it from her front window. She called me on my cell. Ruth is 74 and treats cell phones with the suspicion of someone who survived the rotary dial era, so the fact that she called instead of waiting meant she understood the urgency. "Eleanor," she said, without preamble, "there is a great deal of furniture going into your house." I drove home in 8 minutes. Ruth's is only 6 blocks away, but I took a wrong turn, which I attribute entirely to the fact that my hands were not cooperating with my brain. The area rug was already in my living room when I got there, rolled out over the hardwood Harold had refinished in 2014, burgundy and angular and completely wrong for the space. 2 boxes marked Sylvia office sat at the foot of my stairs. Nathan was assembling something flat-packed in the corner, a shelving unit, pale wood, the kind that comes with an Allen wrench and optimistic instructions. "Nathan." My voice came out very controlled. I have had 72 years to practice controlled. He stood up. He had the grace to look caught. "Mom. Okay, just let me explain." Sylvia appeared from the kitchen. She was wearing an apron, my apron, the blue one with the white stripe that hangs on the hook behind the pantry door. She was wearing it with the ease of someone who had worn it 100 times, and she said, "Eleanor, perfect timing. I'm reorganizing the pantry. You had some things in there that were quite expired." I stood in my own hallway and felt the floor shift under me the way it does in dreams. The explanation Nathan gave was this: the lease on their apartment had ended. The new place, the larger apartment Sylvia had described, was not ready yet. They needed somewhere to stay for just a few weeks while things were finalized. It was practical. It was temporary. It was, Nathan said, with the eyes of a man rehearsing lines, the most logical solution. I asked if it had occurred to him to ask me first. He said they hadn't wanted to burden me with the logistics. Sylvia, still in my apron, said that family didn't need formal invitations. I thought about that word, formal, and how it was doing a great deal of work in that sentence, how it made a reasonable request sound like a cold, bureaucratic act, how it reframed my right to be consulted in my own home as a kind of emotional stinginess. I recognized the maneuver. I simply didn't yet understand how practiced it was going to become. I let them stay. Again, I want to be fair to myself. I let them stay because Nathan was my son, because I had loved him since before he had a name, because somewhere underneath the flat-pack furniture and the wrong rug and the borrowed apron, there was still the boy who used to fall asleep against my arm during thunderstorms. You don't stop loving that boy. You just sometimes can't find him. They took the guest room. By the end of the first week, Sylvia had also claimed the small sitting room off the hallway as her office, moved my sewing table to the basement without asking, and rearranged the kitchen cabinets so that my good cups, the ones with the roses, my mother's cups, were on the highest shelf, which I cannot reach without the step stool. I told myself it was temporary. The roses cup stayed on the high shelf. The bill arrived on a Wednesday. It was from a utilities company, a name I didn't recognize, and it was addressed to Sylvia Voss at 14 Carver Street. Not a forwarding, an address change. She had listed my house as her permanent residence with the utilities company sometime in the past 2 weeks, which meant she had done it before they moved in, which meant the temporary story had a different timeline than the one I'd been given. I set the bill on the kitchen table and waited. Sylvia came down at 9, poured herself coffee from the pot I had made, and sat across from me with her phone, scrolling. She had developed a habit of treating the morning kitchen as her private space, moving through it without acknowledgement, as if I were an appliance that happened to be running. I slid the bill across the table. She glanced at it. Something moved behind her eyes, very fast, and then was gone. "Oh, that," she said. "I needed a permanent address for a few administrative things. It's just paperwork." "This is my address," I said. She went back to her phone. "Sylvia." I kept my voice level. "I'd like you to look at me when I'm speaking to you." She looked up. And there it was, just briefly, just a flash. The face underneath the face. Something impatient and calculating and entirely uninterested in pretending anymore. It lasted only a second. Then the surface closed back over it like water. "Eleanor," she said, and her voice had changed, dropped some of its social register, become flatter and more efficient. "I think we need to be honest with each other. Nathan and I are handling a very complicated financial situation. We are going to be selling this house. That process is already in motion. So the faster you make peace with that, the easier this will be for everyone." I set down my cup. "I have not agreed to sell this house. You will." She said it the way you'd say, "It will rain," not a threat, just a forecast. "And in the meantime, I'd appreciate it if we could skip the daily friction. It's exhausting for Nathan." I looked at her for a long moment. The kitchen smelled of coffee and something underneath it. A cold, foreign smell, like air from a room that's been rearranged while you weren't looking. "I raised Nathan," I said quietly. "I know what exhausts him." Sylvia stood, picked up her mug, and said almost gently, almost like a teacher correcting a misunderstanding, "Learn your place, Eleanor. You don't own anything anymore." She walked out of the kitchen. I sat there. The window that sticks in humid weather was letting in a thin October draft from a gap at the corner of the frame. The dahlia I'd put in the blue pitcher had dropped 2 petals onto the tablecloth. The utilities bill sat between us like a small, politely worded declaration of war. Something happened in me then. Not anger. Not yet. Anger is hot and disorganizing, and what I felt was neither of those things. What I felt was cold and clear, and very, very old in the best possible way. The way a house is old, the way a deed is old, the way anything is old that has survived long enough to know exactly what it is. I picked up the utilities bill. I folded it in thirds. I put it in the pocket of my cardigan, and I went to find the step stool. I was going to get my cups down from that shelf, and then I was going to make some calls. If this story is touching you so far, take a second to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far these stories are reaching. I had not called Miles' car in 2 years. Harold's estate had been settled cleanly, or so I believed, and after the paperwork was signed and the accounts were transferred and the workshop tools were divided between Nathan and Harold's brother Pete, there had seemed no reason to maintain contact with an attorney. I am not the kind of woman who keeps lawyers on retainer. I am the kind of woman who keeps a running grocery list on the back of an envelope and pays her bills on the first of the month and trusts that if she has done things correctly, things will remain correct. I called Miles on a Thursday morning from my bedroom with the door closed. He answered on the third ring. He had one of those voices that belonged in a different century, deliberate, unhurried, the kind of voice that made you feel that whatever you were about to say would be taken seriously. He remembered me immediately. He said, "Mrs. Voss, I'm glad you called. Actually, I've been meaning to reach out." That sentence rearranged something in my chest. He said he'd received some inquiries. He was careful with the word inquiries, the way lawyers are careful with words, placing them precisely so they carry exactly the right weight. Inquiries about Harold's life insurance policy, about the terms of the beneficiary clause, about whether there were conditions under which a surviving spouse's claim might be, he paused here, contested or redirected. "Who made these inquiries?" I asked. He paused again. "The calls came from a woman who identified herself as your daughter-in-law. She also mentioned a family member, a Gloria Voss." I sat down on the edge of the bed. Harold sighed. I don't know why I chose that side. Force of habit, maybe. Or maybe I needed to be close to something of his for what came next. "When?" I asked. "The first call was 8 months ago," Miles said. 8 months. Nathan had come to me with his proposal 6 weeks ago, which meant Sylvia had been planning this for 8 months before she sat at my kitchen table and told me it was about helping the family. Miles asked if I could come in. I said yes. I said tomorrow. He said he'd clear his morning. I hung up and sat on Harold's side of the bed and looked at the pale yellow wallpaper with the small blue birds, and I thought, 8 months. She has been building this for 8 months. And Gloria helped her. Gloria, Harold's sister, who cried at his funeral and held my hand and said, "We have to take care of each other now." I'd not been in the attic since spring. It was Harold's domain more than mine, low-ceilinged and cedar-smelling, full of the organized chaos of a man who never threw anything away if it might conceivably be useful. Fishing equipment, storm windows, 3 different sizes of the same wrench, because Harold believed in redundancy, and along the north wall, a row of cedar boxes, each one labeled in his handwriting, which was small and precise and looked like the handwriting of someone who had once been told their penmanship was poor and had quietly spent the rest of their life proving otherwise. Most of the boxes I knew. Tax records, warranties, Pete's old baseball cards Harold had promised to return and never did. But on my third pass along the wall that Friday afternoon, I found one I didn't recognize. No label. The cedar was darker than the others, older, and the brass latch had the particular dullness of something that had not been opened in a long time. It was not locked. Harold didn't believe in locking things from the people he trusted. He believed instead in simply not mentioning them. Inside, a passbook, a handwritten ledger, 3 letters in envelopes, unopened, addressed to me, dated across the last year of his life. I sat down on a storm window box and opened the first letter. His handwriting, small and precise and slightly uneven near the end, where his hands had begun to give him trouble. Eleanor. If you're reading this, I was right to prepare it. I have set aside an account, savings only, nothing complicated, at Harmon Federal. The number is on the passbook. It is in your name only. I never told Nathan because I wanted you to have something that was entirely yours, no matter what happened. The balance as of last month is $47,000. Use it for whatever you need. Use it for roses if you want. I love you. H. I read it 3 times. Then I opened the passbook. $47,000 untouched, in my name. Harold had been depositing quietly for 11 years. 20 here, 50 there. The way a man builds something when he's not sure what he's building, but trusts that it will matter eventually. It mattered now. I held the passbook against my chest for a moment, in the cedar-smelling dark, with the sound of Sylvia moving around my kitchen 2 floors below, and I said, out loud, to no one, or maybe to Harold, I see it now. I see what you were doing. Then I picked up the ledger. The ledger was Harold's, but the last 4 pages were not Harold's handwriting. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. The entries were in a different hand, neater in a performed way, the neatness of someone trying to look careful rather than someone who naturally was. Dates, account numbers. And at the top of the 3rd to last page, in handwriting I recognized from birthday cards and Christmas tags and a thank you note I'd kept because it had seemed sincere at the time. EV signature, loan authorization, Darden Financial, $190,000. Below it, a date, 7 months ago. Below that, a scan, printed and folded into the ledger, of a loan document, a personal loan. $190,000 secured against the property at 14 Carver Street, signed at the bottom by Eleanor Voss. I looked at that signature for a long time. It was close. It was genuinely close, the loop of the E, the way the V ran into the O. Someone had practiced. Someone had practiced enough that a distracted bank employee or a complicit notary might accept it without question. But I have signed my name the same way since I was 19 years old, and there is a small habit I have never lost. A tiny upward flick at the end of the S in Voss, like a question mark that never quite formed. Harold used to tease me about it, called it my secret mark. It was not on this signature. I folded the scan carefully and placed it back in the ledger. I placed the ledger in the cedar box. I carried the box downstairs, past Sylvia's closed office door, past the wrong rug in my living room, past the high shelf where my mother's cups still sat out of reach, and I put the box in my bedroom closet behind my winter coats. Then I sat at my small writing desk and I took out a piece of paper and a pen, a real pen, the kind that leaves an impression, and I wrote down everything I knew in the order I knew it. Names, dates, numbers, Gloria's name, Frank Darden's name, from the letterhead on the loan document, the $190,000, the insurance inquiries 8 months ago, the utilities bill in my pocket. I looked at the list. It was enough. It was more than enough. The question was not whether I could stop them. The question was how I wanted to stop them, and what I wanted to be left standing when it was over. I thought about calling the police. I thought about it for approximately 4 minutes. Then I thought about something else entirely. I picked up the pen again. I wrote one more line at the bottom of the page, underlined it twice, and sat back. Outside, the October roses were past their peak, browning at the edges, losing petals to the wind, but the canes were strong and green, and I knew, the way you know things after 40 years of gardening, that they would be back in the spring. Stronger usually for having been cut back. Miles Carr's office smelled like old paper and radiator heat, which I found immediately comforting. There is something trustworthy about a room that smells like work has been done in it for a long time. He had a window that looked out onto a small courtyard where a single oak had dropped most of its leaves, and the light coming through was thin and pale and very honest, the kind of light that makes everything look exactly as it is. He stood when I came in. People his age still do that. I appreciate it. I laid the loan document on his desk without preamble. He put on his glasses and looked at it for a long time without speaking, which is how I knew it was serious. Miles Carr was not a man who used silence carelessly. "This is a forgery," he said finally, not a question. "Yes, the signature is close. It isn't mine." He looked at me over his glasses. "I can see that. The notarization is also irregular. I recognize this stamp. This came through a private notary service that was investigated 2 years ago for a similar issue in Allegheny County." He set the document down carefully, the way you set down something that might matter in a courtroom. "Eleanor, you have grounds for criminal fraud charges, forgery, potentially elder financial abuse, which carries enhanced penalties in Pennsylvania." "I know," I said. "Do you want to pursue that route?" I folded my hands in my lap. "I want to know about another route first. If I were to purchase this debt, the $190,000 loan, from Darden Financial, is that possible?" Miles looked at me for a moment. Then something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but a kind of recalibration, like a man updating his assessment of the person sitting across from him. "It is possible," he said slowly. "Debt purchasing is legal. If Darden Financial agrees to sell the note, you would become the creditor of record. Nathan would owe the debt to you, secured against your own property." He paused. "That is a considerable amount of leverage." "Yes," I said. "It is." He almost smiled. "Harold always said you were the smarter one." "Harold was a wise man," I said, "about most things." Miles agreed to handle the legal architecture. He would review the insurance inquiry records, document Gloria's involvement, and prepare the paperwork for a debt purchase offer. He told me to be patient. He told me not to confront anyone yet. He told me very gently that I should try to behave at home as if nothing had changed. I told him I had been doing that for 3 weeks already. He did almost smile that time. Frank Darden was not what I expected. I had built a picture of him from his name on the letterhead, something angular and impatient, a man in a glass office who made decisions by spreadsheet. The man who answered when I called Darden Financial was tired-sounding and moderately surprised to be hearing from me, and when I explained who I was and what I was calling about, there was a long pause in which I could hear him breathing and the distant sound of an office printer. "Mrs. Voss," he said carefully, "you understand this is an unusual request." "I do." "The loan was taken out by my son, using my forged signature as collateral." I let that sit for a moment. "I have documentation of the forgery, Mr. Darden. I also have an attorney who is currently reviewing your notarization records in relation to a previous investigation in Allegheny County." Another pause, longer this time. "I am not calling to threaten you. I am calling to offer you a clean exit from what is about to become a complicated situation. I would like to purchase this note at face value, today, if possible." The printer sound stopped. Frank Darden, it turned out, was a practical man. He had bought Nathan's debt from a secondary lender 4 months ago, had received 2 partial payments and then nothing, and had been preparing to begin collection proceedings. A clean purchase at face value was, from his perspective, significantly preferable to what was coming otherwise. We agreed on terms within 40 minutes. I called Miles from the parking lot. He was not surprised. He said he would have the transfer documents ready within 48 hours and that I should sit tight. Then I drove to Harmon Federal, and I sat across from a young woman with a name tag that said, "Brianna and I withdrew $47,000 from the account Harold had built in secret across 11 quiet years, and I wired it as a partial payment toward the note purchase, with Miles's firm covering the remainder from a short-term bridge arrangement we had discussed." As I walked out of the bank, the wind came off the street cold and direct, and I turned my face into it for a moment the way Harold used to do. Eyes closed, just feeling the fact of it. "Rainy day money," he'd called it. "Nobody knows about it but you." He was right. Nobody had known. And now it was going to do exactly what he'd saved it for, even if he couldn't have known the specific shape of the storm. The hardest part was going home. Not because I was afraid. I had moved past afraid somewhere in the attic on Friday afternoon, somewhere between Harold's letter and Sylvia's handwriting in the ledger. What replaced it was something quieter and more durable, a kind of patient focus, the feeling of having set something in motion that only required time now. The hard part was the performance. Sylvia was in the kitchen when I got back, laptop open, a call on speaker that she didn't end when I walked in. I set my bag down. I put away my coat. I filled the kettle. She talked on her phone, and I moved around the kitchen's edges like a woman who had accepted her reduced geography, and I felt her watching me from the corner of her attention, checking for signs of disruption, finding none. Nathan came home at 6. He looked worse than he had the week before, thinner around the eyes, the way men look when they are sleeping badly and eating worse. I made pot roast because it was a Tuesday, and pot roast was what I made on Tuesdays, and we sat at my table on my chairs and ate from my plates, and Sylvia talked about a property she'd seen online, a 2-bedroom in Cranberry Township, and Nathan nodded at the right intervals, and I ate my dinner and said the appropriate things, and nobody knew anything was different. After dinner, Nathan helped me with the dishes. He did it the way he had since he was 8, rinsing before he handed them to me, which is unnecessary, because I have a dishwasher, but he's never stopped doing it, and I've never told him to stop. We stood at the sink, and he handed me a rinsed plate, and I dried it, and he said, without looking at me, "You doing okay, Mom?" I looked at the side of his face, my father's eyes, Harold's jaw, and something underneath the tiredness that was still, faintly, the boy in the thunderstorm. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said. "I'm just fine." He nodded. He handed me another plate. I thought about what was coming. I thought about what it would do to him. The shock of it, the shame of it, and beyond the shame, if I was right about him, the relief. Because the thing about people who have made terrible choices is that some of them, underneath the choice, are exhausted by it. Some of them are waiting, without knowing they're waiting, for someone to come and stop them. I was going to stop them. But not tonight. Tonight was dishes. Tonight was pot roast and rinsed plates and the small, ordinary rhythm of a house that was still standing. I had 48 hours. I dried the last plate and put it away. Not on the high shelf, on the correct shelf, at eye level, where it belonged. And I listened to the house breathe around me, and I thought, hold on, Harold. Watch this. I have made Sunday pot roast, Thursday tea, birthday cakes from scratch, and one very ill-advised soufflé that Harold still brought up at least once a year until the day he died. I have cooked for grief and for celebration, and for the particular kind of quiet that settles over a house in winter when there is nothing to do but feed the people in it. I know what a table can do. I know that a meal is never just a meal. It is a context, a frame, a set of conditions under which people lower their guard because food is comfort, and comfort makes people believe they are safe. I planned the dinner on Wednesday. By Thursday, I had the menu. By Friday, I had called Gloria. She answered on the second ring, which told me she had been expecting contact, from me or from Sylvia, some signal that things were progressing. Her voice had that careful warmth people use when they are performing a feeling rather than having it. "Eleanor, how lovely. How are you holding up?" "I'm well," I said. "I'm having a small family dinner Sunday. I'd love for you to come. I feel like we haven't talked properly since everything with Nathan. I could use your perspective." A pause, brief but there. "Of course," she said. "Of course I'll come. What can I bring?" "Nothing at all," I said. "Just yourself." I called Nathan next and told him the same thing. Family dinner, Sunday, 6 o'clock. I was making his father's favorite. He sounded relieved in the way people sound when they believe a problem is resolving itself. Sylvia, when told, said, "Lovely," and went back to her laptop. I spent Saturday cooking and preparing 2 other things simultaneously. The first was the folder Miles had couriered to me Friday afternoon. Clean, organized, tabbed. The debt transfer document, now finalized and recorded. The forged loan paperwork with Miles's forensic notation attached. The insurance inquiry records with Gloria's name on the call log. The payment plan proposal, which Miles had helped me draft, and which ran to 3 pages, and was, as he described it, entirely legal, entirely enforceable, and frankly, elegant. The second thing I prepared was the table. Harold's table, solid oak, 6 chairs, the one piece of furniture in the house I would sooner burn than sell. I ironed the good linen. I put out the crystal Harold's mother had given us at our wedding. I got my mother's cups down from the high shelf, all of them, and washed them and set them out for after-dinner coffee. I put roses in the center, the last of the season, the ones still holding on at the south rail, a deep coral that Harold had always called his favorite. I set 4 places, and at each place, under the folded napkin, I put an envelope. Gloria arrived first, which I had expected. Early arrival is the habit of people who want to assess a room before others fill it. She came in with a bottle of wine she'd said she wouldn't bring, kissed my cheek, and moved through the hallway with the ease of a woman who considered herself a stakeholder in the property. She complimented the roses. She asked if I'd thought more about everything. I said I had thought about very little else. Nathan and Sylvia came down from upstairs at 6 exactly. Sylvia had changed into something that read as celebratory, a dark blouse, her good earrings, and I understood that she had dressed for a victory dinner. She believed, I realized, that I had called this gathering to announce my surrender, that the dinner was my way of making the capitulation feel dignified. She moved to the table with the confidence of a woman who has already redecorated the room in her mind and is now just waiting for the paperwork. We sat. I served. Pot roast, Harold's recipe, the one with the juniper and the dark beer that takes 4 hours and makes the whole house smell like something worth coming home to. Roasted carrots, fresh bread. The crystal caught the candlelight and threw small prisms across the linen, and it was, I will say, a beautiful table. Harold would have approved. Harold, I think, would have loved every calculated inch of it. We talked. Gloria asked about the garden. Nathan ate with the focused energy of a man who was hungrier than he wanted to admit. Sylvia made a comment about the Cranberry Township property, square footage, school district, as if I had already agreed to fund it. And I listened and nodded and refilled her wine. Underneath the table, in my cardigan pocket, my hand rested on the edge of the folder. I watched Sylvia's face across the candlelight. She was almost relaxed. That was what I had been waiting for. The moment the performance became so comfortable, it stopped being a performance, when she was no longer acting confident, but actually was. She laughed at something Gloria said. She touched Nathan's arm. She looked briefly, like a woman who had already won. I let her have that moment. I let it go on a little longer than necessary, the way you let a fire burn down before you do anything about it, because doing something about it too soon only scatters the sparks. Then I said, "Before dessert, I have something for each of you." The envelopes came out from under the napkins. I had timed it so everyone had finished eating. Plates cleared, bread gone, the particular satisfaction of a good meal sitting warm in the room. I wanted them comfortable. I wanted them to feel, for one more minute, that this was still a dinner. Gloria opened hers first, because Gloria has never been able to wait. I watched her eyes move across the first page. The call log with her name, the date, 8 months ago. Miles's notation identifying her as the source of the insurance policy details that Sylvia had used to build the scheme. I watched her face move through several expressions very quickly. Confusion, recognition, and then something she tried to cover with a cough. "Eleanor, In a moment, Gloria," I said pleasantly. "Let's give everyone time to read." Sylvia had gone very still. She was on the second page, the forged loan document with Miles's forensic annotation. Signature inconsistent with authenticated samples. Notarization stamp associated with ongoing investigation. Her eyes were moving, but her face had stopped. It had simply stopped, like a clock someone had reached into and held. Nathan was on the first page still. He read slowly. He always had, not because he was slow, but because he took things seriously once he could no longer avoid them. I watched him read, and I watched the color leave his face in the gradual way of a man understanding not just what he is reading, but what it means about the past 8 months of his life and the woman sitting next to him. "The document in your envelope," I said into the silence, "is a deed of debt of... As of last Thursday, I am the creditor of record on the $190,000 loan from Darden Financial. Nathan, you now owe that money to me. It is secured against this property, which remains in my name where it has always been." Sylvia looked up, her mouth opened. "The third page," I said, "is a payment plan. I had written it carefully, with Miles, in language that was precise and fair and utterly without loopholes. If they wished to remain in the house, which they were welcome to do, the following conditions applied. Nathan would submit a complete accounting of all personal finances on the first of each month. All expenditures over $500 required my countersignature. Sylvia, in lieu of a cash payment toward the debt, would serve as my personal assistant, correspondence, appointments, household management. 40 hours per week, documented and logged, with the hours credited against the interest accruing on the loan. They were not being evicted. They were being employed by the woman they had tried to dispossess. "Alternatively," I said, "I can file the forgery documentation with the district attorney's office tomorrow morning. Miles has already prepared the filing. It would result in criminal charges for forgery and elder financial abuse. Those carry significant penalties in Pennsylvania." I looked at Sylvia. "I'm told the notary is already cooperating with investigators on a related matter, so the evidentiary threshold is quite low." The candles burned. The crystal sat in its places. The coral roses held their color in the warm light. Gloria made a sound that was not quite a word. Nathan put down his envelope. He was looking at me with the gray-green eyes, my father's eyes, and they were full of something I hadn't seen in them in a long time. Maybe ever. Something that looked, if I am being precise, like the particular shame of a person who has finally been seen clearly by someone whose opinion of them still matters enormously. "Mom," he said. His voice was very small. "You can tell me what you want to say," I said, "but not tonight. Tonight I want you to read the payment plan, all of it. And in the morning, when you've thought about it, come and find me on the porch." I stood up. "Now," I said, "who would like dessert?" I went to the kitchen. I put the kettle on. I got down 4 cups, my mother's cups, rose-handled, irreplaceable, and I set them on their saucers, and I stood at the kitchen window that sticks in humid weather, and I listened to the silence in the dining room, which was the most eloquent silence I had heard in a very long time. Outside, the last roses moved in the November wind. The house breathed around me. I was home. He was already on the porch when I came down. 6:15 in the morning, the sky still more gray than blue, the elm throwing bare winter shadows across the boards. Nathan was in Harold's chair, not mine, Harold's, which nobody sat in, which had been empty for 4 years, and he was holding a cup of coffee with both hands the way his father used to, as if the warmth were something he didn't want to waste. He didn't hear me at first. I stood in the doorway and looked at my son. 53 years collapsed into a single quiet moment, and I thought about the thunderstorm boy and the man in the gambling debt and everything in between, and I let myself feel all of it at once, which is the only honest way to feel anything. He looked up. He started to stand. "Stay," I said. "That's all right." I sat in my chair. I pulled my cardigan closed. The November air was raw and direct and smelled of wood smoke from somewhere down Carver Street, and we sat for a moment without speaking, the way we used to when he was a teenager and had done something wrong, and we both knew the conversation was coming, but neither of us wanted to be the one to start it. He started it. "I told myself it was helping you," he said. "That you were alone in this big house and the money was just sitting here and you weren't. You weren't using it. That's what I told myself." He stopped, stared into his cup. I knew it wasn't true. I knew it the whole time. "I know you did," I said. "The gambling—" He shook his head. "It started small. It always starts small." Most things do. Sylvia said she had a plan. She said it would fix everything. I let her. I let her do things I should have stopped. He finally looked at me. The gray-green eyes were raw in the early light, stripped of the tired performance he'd been wearing for weeks. She forged your signature, Mom. I didn't know about that specific part until last night. I want you to know that. I looked at him for a long time. I believe you, I said. That doesn't absolve you, but I believe you. He nodded. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, a gesture so familiar it hurt, the exact gesture he'd used at 7 years old when he was trying not to cry and failing. What do we do now? You read the payment plan, I said. I read it. And? He was quiet for a moment. Then, it's fair. It's more than fair. Another pause. It's more than I deserve. Probably, I said, but I'm your mother, so. We sat with that for a while. Down the street, the Mullen boy walked his retriever, same as always, same as every morning, the dog pulling toward the elm and the boy pretending to resist. The mail truck groaned around the corner. The ordinary world, proceeding. I'm going to need help, Nathan said quietly. With the gambling, real help. I know, I said. Miles can recommend someone, a proper program. I paused. That is a condition that didn't make it into the written plan, but it's a condition nonetheless. He almost smiled. It looked like Harold. Yes, ma'am, he said. We finished our coffee. When he went inside, he squeezed my shoulder with one hand, brief, wordless, the grammar of people who share too much history for sentences. I sat on the porch alone for a while after that, in the thin winter light, and I let myself cry. Just a little. Just enough. Grief and relief are sometimes indistinguishable from each other. I have learned to let them both come through without asking which is which. 3 months is enough time for a new order to establish its rhythms. By February, the household had settled into a shape that I suspect none of us could have predicted from the outside, and which from the inside felt, improbably, occasionally, against all reasonable expectation. Almost normal. Sylvia arrived at my small writing desk at 9 each morning with a notepad. This had been, I will admit, my private anticipation when drafting the payment plan, imagining Sylvia Voss, in her good earrings, sitting across from me with a notepad, and the image had sustained me through several difficult moments in the preceding weeks. The reality was both more and less than the imagination. She was efficient. I will grant her that. She sorted correspondence with a speed that suggested organizational talent that had previously been directed toward entirely the wrong ends. She scheduled my appointment with Dr. Patel, handled a billing dispute with the utilities company, the irony of which I chose not to mention aloud, and typed 3 letters I dictated regarding a neighborhood historical preservation matter I'd been meaning to address for 2 years. She did not complain. That surprised me. She did not apologize either. That did not. What she did was work, with a focused correctness that I recognized as the behavior of a woman who understood precisely the nature of her situation and had decided that performance was the most strategic response available. I did not require contrition. The payment plan did not require contrition. What it required was 40 hours per week, documented and logged, and that is what I received. We were not warm with each other. We were not cold. We were, I suppose, what people become when the pretense has been stripped away entirely, and what remains is simply the requirement to exist in the same space, a kind of functional honesty that is in its way more real than the performed warmth that preceded it. She called me Eleanor. I called her Sylvia. We drank our morning coffee at opposite ends of the kitchen and found, if not peace, a workable arrangement. Nathan submitted his first financial accounting on February 1st, 6 pages, every cent documented, accompanied by a note in his handwriting that said only, "I'm working on it. N." He had started a program the 2nd week of January, a proper one, twice a week, in an office building on Grant Street with a therapist Miles had recommended. He looked, by February, less like weather coming in and more like weather passing. Still tired. But the particular texture of the tiredness had changed. It was the tiredness of someone doing the work, rather than the tiredness of someone hiding from it. Gloria was not invited back. That required no document, no legal language, no dramatic pronouncement. I simply did not call her, and she did not call me, and the absence settled into the house like the absence of a draft, something you notice only in how much warmer everything becomes without it. Ruth heard through the neighborhood that Gloria had told people Eleanor had gone difficult in her old age. Ruth, who is 74 and has a gift for precision, told me this while pouring tea on a Thursday, and added, "I told Margaret Owens that difficult is just what powerful looks like on a woman of a certain age, and Margaret seemed to find that very clarifying." I found it clarifying, too. The roses came back in May. They always do. That is the thing about roses, the thing Harold understood better than any gardening book could explain. You cut them back hard in November, down to what looks like nothing, just canes and thorns and the stubborn architecture of survival, and they look for all the world like they are finished. And then May arrives, and the green comes, and by the third week there are buds on every cane, more than the year before, always more, as if the cutting back is not an ending but a kind of instruction. I was deadheading the coral ones on a Saturday morning, the last year's growth, clearing space for what was coming, when I heard the porch door and Nathan came out with 2 cups of coffee, holding them both in the careful 2-handed grip that had apparently been in the Voss blood for generations. He set one on the porch rail near where I was working, the way Harold used to, and sat in his father's chair, and said nothing, which was also the way Harold used to. I worked for a while in the comfortable silence. The elm was fully leafed. The Mullenboys' retriever barked at something down the street. The window that sticks in humid weather was slightly open. Nathan had fixed it in March, properly this time, and it had taken him 4 attempts, which I found in every way appropriate. "The hydrangea's coming in blue again," Nathan said eventually, looking at the south bed. "It's always blue when we've had a wet winter," I said. "Your father never remembered that." "I didn't know that." "There's a lot you don't know yet," I said, not unkindly. "You have time." He nodded. He drank his coffee. I clipped a spent cane and dropped it in the bucket and moved to the next, my knees making their usual comments about the situation, which I ignored, as I have always ignored them. This is what I want to say, to anyone listening, to any woman who has felt the floor shift under her in her own home, who has heard her worth measured against square footage and insurance policies and someone else's debt. The house on Carver Street still belongs to Eleanor Voss. The deed has not changed, has. The wallpaper with the small bluebirds has not changed. The third stair still creaks, and the elm still throws its shadows across the porch boards. And in May, when the roses bloom along the south rail, there is still no more beautiful place on earth. That is not sentiment. That is a fact that was true before they came, and is true now, and will be true after whatever comes next. Harold built this place with careful hands and quiet love and one small private account that he called a rainy day nobody knows about. He left me his workshop smell and his chair and his letter in the cedar box and $47,000 and a signature habit he teased me about for 41 years. He left me, in other words, everything I needed. I just had to go up to the attic and find it. I clipped the last dead cane and stood up straight and looked at the rose bed, which was full of green and full of promise, and I picked up Harold's coffee cup from the porch rail, and I took a long sip, and I let the morning do what mornings do on Carver Street, which is simply to proceed, steady and unhurried and entirely indifferent to anyone who thought it would do otherwise. Somewhere inside, Sylvia's notepad was open on my writing desk. Nathan's February accounting was filed in order in my top drawer. The cedar box was on the shelf in my bedroom closet, next to Harold's letters, which I had read 11 times now and intended to read 11 more. And the third stair creaked as someone went up, and the window held against the May breeze, and the house breathed around me, deep and even and entirely itself. Some lessons take a lifetime to teach. Some students need the whole curriculum. And some houses know from the foundation up exactly who they belong to.